All right. Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My guest today is someone I've been fortunate enough to work with and whose work is reshaping how we think about mental health in cybersecurity. Steve Shelton is the Obi-Wan of resilience, a calm, grounded voice guiding burned out professionals through the nonstop demands of this industry. He's the founder and chief resilience officer of Green Shoe Consulting, where he combines psychology, storytelling, and science to challenge the outdated ideas of performance and well being. I've partnered with Steve and the Chicago CISO of the Year Committee to bring stress and burnout workshops to our community. And he recently delivered a standout keynote presentation at B-Sides 312 that left a real impression. From CISO coaching to leading the industry's first evidence-based burnout study, Steve is focused on connection over isolation and sustainability over constant grind. He doesn't just advocate for resilience, he builds the spaces where it can thrive. So, Steve, welcome.
Thank you very much, Robert. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. And I think you wanted to start off with a quick survey of the audience. Is that right?
Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen. Bear with me for a second. There we go. The idea here is I'd like to do a little check-in in regards to, and Robert, you can participate in this as well, but where is everybody at in this moment in regards to their own stress levels and burnout? So if on the left of the screen is the 0 and you're feeling no levels of stress, you might be asleep or dead right now. It's a bad joke. Or on the opposite level, a 10 is you are burnt out and probably need to go to the hospital. So where is everybody coming in at this point on this scale? I'd like to understand where you're at, and then we can kind of build out what actually is behind that, what's leading you to score yourself at that number.
Yeah, so me personally, I'm at least 7 there. Although if you expand, it's not the easiest to read. Your screen is a little tiny for us. So if you want to maximize that, it's a little bit better. So
that's the best I got.
I know. And then hopefully we'll get some responses in the chat. But with that.
So I'm going to ask, Robert, since you said you scored a 7, what symptoms or what led you to score yourself a 7?
Yeah, just right now, the number of things I'm trying to juggle. I've got so many projects and deadlines and things that I want to participate in that it's been a little crazy for me.
Right on. That's good data to work with. So with that, I want to make sure we get into this aspect of like what is leading into this stuff, which we'll touch on, but that's a good start.
Okay. And then for anybody in the audience, just a quick question for you as well, besides the poll, and that would be, what motivated you to join this webinar? Feel free to drop us a note in the chat and let us know what caught your attention and made you go, oh, I really want to check in on that. And while we're checking to see if any chat comes through, Steve, your background, what led you here, in part at least, is that you became a sports performance psychologist. Is that right?
Not a full psychologist because I don't have my doctorate, but I do have a master's degree in human and performance psychology, yes.
Okay, performance psychology. So performance psychology and cybersecurity, it doesn't sound like the two things fit together, but you found out that it does. So how does stress, chronic stress, affect things like decision quality and innovation or risk tolerance?
Yeah, so there's a few things within that. So one, I'll define stress so all the listeners are aware of what stress actually is. We'll kind of get into how it manifests into burnout. But the idea is that stress is a natural human response. Mm-hmm. And so our brains have been set up and conditioned to program, however you want to say it, through millions of years of human evolution. The majority of that time, our default was just strictly to survive. So that survival instinct, our brain is a great alerting system on any threats in our environment. So stress is really a response to any threats and challenges that we're experiencing in our environment.
Mm-hmm.
That delineation between threats and challenge is really important, because that aspect, if we have a stimulus in our environment, for example, the deadlines that you have to manage, when you
Right.
get another deadline thrown on your plate, that adds some pressure to you. And so that's the stimulus in your environment. The moment that you get that deadline assigned to you, you're applying in real time a feeling and a meaning to that thing.
Okay.
So
Yes.
if you apply a meaning that that thing is a threat, that means that thing has the potential to harm you.
Mm. At least in your
Versus,
mind.
say that again?
At least in your mind, right?
Correct, right?
Right.
It's a perception. So if you also look at that same thing and choose to give the meaning to it as it's a challenge. A threat means we feel like we don't have the resources to manage that obstacle, task, whatever it is, and it's going to overwhelm us, cause us harm,
Okay.
right? Versus a challenge is something that we feel like, whether in the moment we have the resources and ability to manage that thing and overcome it,
Mm-hmm.
or if we don't feel like we have the resources, we feel like we have the ability to skill up. We have the ability to ask for help and some support in dealing with that thing. At some point in time, we will overcome that challenge, right?
Okay.
That's a much different mindset than a threat,
Yes.
right? So the challenge, playing off that word again, is the fact that when we go into survival instinct mode, there's three different types of stress. There's the positive type, which we call eustress. So that's starting a new job, that's starting a new hobby, going on a first date, some things that we feel uncomfortable and there's some friction to, but once we complete that thing, there's a positive outcome associated with it.
Okay. Right.
So the eustress is the quote unquote good stress. When we dip into the negative stress and the types of stress that have a negative impact on us, there's two kinds. There's acute and then chronic. Acute is short term. It happens momentarily for a few minutes or maybe a few hours, whatever it is. In those moments of distress, and especially acute, your survival instinct kicks in, right? So you revert to cave person mode, where you are focused on survival, right? The challenge with that is that when you're in survival instinct mode, you no longer have access to your critical thinking, problem solving, innovative mindset that allows you to think more objectively without the emotion involved, to look at things as how they truly are and choose how you're going to respond to that thing.
And that's just simply because that's the way our brains are wired. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So the idea then is the issues occur. Acute is a normal response also, right? Your survival instinct kicks in and then it resolves fairly quickly, right? It's short term.
Right.
The issue though is when your survival instinct response is kicking into gear on a regular basis, that becomes chronic distress. Chronic distress, which we'll be talking about, and that's where burnout occurs. Chronic distress is, research shows it's not the same for everybody, but on average, your survival instinct is kicking in for more than 19 days on average.
19 days. Okay.
Right. So you think about cybersecurity incident response. If there's a major breach, incident response folks are working long hours, reducing and sacrificing their sleep,
right,
to try to remediate that breach, right? Some cases that could be weeks on end.
Sure. I've seen responses go for months.
Right. So those folks get burnt out quite a bit because it's all hands on deck, fix the issue, sacrifice your sleep and your personal health. And so it's an aspect of like being aware of these things. Everybody has an ideal state. If you've ever heard the term flow state or being in the zone, you feel like you're being utilized to your like maximum skill set, to the level of stress is in alignment with you feeling like you're being fully utilized, you're challenged, you're focused, everything is like working in the way that you want it to. And that's kind of the incident response environment too, right? This doesn't just apply to incident response, but this is the good example. And so it's an aspect of like, you're trained as an incident responder that your job is to find the breach and resolve it. Right. That's what you train for. So when that breach occurs, it's like, oh, this is what I'm training for. This is great. Well, you can only operate in that ideal state for so long, right? Our minds need to be able have only so much energy. Our bodies only have so much energy. And it's a lot like an athlete. If you're going to continue to perform at a high level, you can only do that for so long before you start to get deteriorating results, right? So that's
Right.
where the decision making gets impacted. If you've ever heard people talking about, like, if you're going to study a certain topic, especially high school or college, as an adult, you've probably got 30 to 40 minutes where you can really focus on that material. And then you need to take a break because your mind can only take so much. You're expending energy. It's the same type of concept with this. Everybody has an ideal zone of optimal functioning. That's a
Yep.
sports psychology concept. But the idea is, if you think about it as like a bell curve, the top of that curve is the ideal state where you feel flow state in the zone. You're operating at your ideal level with that level of stress that allows you to feel engaged, energized, challenged. But that's going to start to go to that other side, and you're going to start getting a downward curve of results. So when that
Mm.
happens, people tend to feel like they've got tunnel vision, that they're locked into that thing, but your brain only has so much energy and capacity to take in information. So if you're in that tunnel vision mode where you're just focused on these things and doing that job, your energy is going to start to diminish, and your decision making capability and the information you can take in is going to start to degrade. And that's part of the challenge. And then when that happens, mistakes are made. Your ability to make effective decisions and do what needs to be done, the right information at the right time, starts to go downhill to where you start making mistakes. And then the outcomes, you're going to have to go back, fix mistakes. It's going to take more time instead of being as effective as you could be.
Which is not resilient when it comes to people, which we kind of forget about. We talk about the resilience of our systems and resilience of other things, but we don't talk about making sure our people are resilient. In fact, you shared with me an interesting story about what you've been doing with one company as part of a incident response uh, addition for their people, as opposed to the usual thing that people might do, which is buy them pizza. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we're working with a couple of vendors right now who provide that support for incident response teams. The idea is, especially through a tabletop exercise, you plan all these things out in terms of, like, here's the breach, who's going to respond, who's responsible for what. But oftentimes they don't take into consideration the psychological element of those things of, like,
Sure.
that breach is hit. The cybersecurity people are fairly trained on what to expect. That still doesn't, like, take out the human element and response of it. So you're going to have a response to that. But then also the other executives that are not trained
Mm,
to handle these things,
interesting.
they're having a hard time managing their mental and emotional states too. They want to help. It's a crisis. They think they want to jump in and do something. Oftentimes, they may, if they're not following the playbook and understanding what help actually is, they
Yeah.
can make things worse, right? But within that, there's an aspect of, we want to do some proactive work to understand how people do their jobs. And so, to your point, Robert, your first question of, maybe that's an upcoming question, I apologize, but the idea is, like, understanding how people do their jobs. And we're not asking you to leave your job. So many companies have invested in well-being initiatives of, well, we have yoga, we have mindfulness on site, you can meditate
Mm,
and that type of thing. And that aspect, there's a positive intent behind that. But the challenge is, especially in cybersecurity, when people are so busy and they're overloaded with their workloads, they have so many things that make their job hard to do. The thought of leaving your environment to go to a different environment to do something else that might have some positive benefits, that whole process becomes a barrier to trying to do that.
ah,
So removing that barrier is, okay, help me understand how you do your job. Are you working from home? Are you working in an office? Do you have back to back to back to back meetings like many people do?
yes.
Well, how can you make those meetings more effective so that way they're not taking up a full hour or a full 30 minutes? Or if you have meetings back to back like that, can you take 5 minutes in between those meetings to stand up, get some water, do something to re-energize, and then allow yourself to be present for the next meeting. So that way you can contribute and add as much value as possible, right? And so it's those little things, that those little mini breaks and those little aspects of being present and grounded that allow people to really respond and be their best.
And in fact, during the COVID Zoom era of back-to-back meetings where they really became back-to-back because people were ending right at the top of the hour and you had to jump into another one, I saw some movement to people trying to make their meetings only 45 or 50 minutes long to give that gap. But that seems to have diminished. I don't see as many people planning it. And I think it's because you have to custom set your invites in order to do that. But I think people should come back to that. But all of this, so as you said, a lot, all this keys on how you view things. Is it a threat or is it a challenge? So what is some of the myths about stress, burnout, mental performance that cybersecurity leadership should know about to debunk today?
So the first one, which I feel hits on a big, big topic for the industry as a whole, is one, there's a badge of honor, so to speak, of being the cybersecurity professional that can do it all and take on all of the stress and the burdens of doing the job, because that's part of the job and nobody can do it as well as you can. So there's a badge of honor behind it. So myth number one is this long-standing idea that stress in the workplace and burnout is an individual employee-based issue only. So that ties into that badge of honor concept of it's on you. It's really it's part of the job, right? So the idea here is that, one, there is some truth that we all could benefit from having some more training, because there's three things as a human being that you can train. You can train your craft, your body, and your mind.
Okay.
Right? Everybody in cybersecurity, whether you're on the vendor side of the house, practitioner side of the house, you've been training your skill set as a cybersecurity professional, and there's ways to do that, right? So you're training your craft. Most everybody knows that exercising and moving is good for your physical health, right? So there's that aspect of it.
We know it, whether or not we act upon it is different.
Totally, right? And so that's a whole thing. But then the other idea is training your mind. So most of us don't do the work to train our minds because we didn't realize or didn't know that there's ways to do that.
Yeah. Right? So what do you mean by training your mind?
So all of they're referred to as soft skills, but I'll call them more human skills because there's nothing that's soft about them, right? This aspect of leadership skills, communication skills, interpersonal skills, relating to other people. So the research that you brought up that we're conducting, one of the biggest stressors that most everybody talks about is dealing with other people.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I'm not surprised.
Right. So this aspect of can be really frustrating, annoying, dealing with other people, trying to communicate effectively, trying to get them to understand the importance of what you're trying to do in relationship to their role in their components. Because the challenge is for cybersecurity, the business often doesn't see cybersecurity as a priority. The business is there to make money. Right. Cybersecurity is not making money per se. So then it becomes a challenge if you're just headbutting and saying, well, my stuff is really important and it's falling on deaf ears. And you just continue to say, well, my stuff's really important. That will lead to a lot of resentment, frustration, irritation, all those things that don't help you feel good. Right. And if you're coming from trying to communicate and come from a place of frustration and irritation with somebody else, that communication is not going to be that effective because your tone, your energy, what you're communicating is going to come out of that place of frustration and irritation, which that doesn't really attract people, right? So the idea is, how do you develop some ability to train these skills on how to be effective as a leader? Because we also believe that everybody individually needs to be a leader of their own lives, because you're in charge of your life, first and foremost. Secondly, communicating effectively, leading effectively, engaging people, and understanding what's in your control and what's not in your control Those are huge skill sets to have, because when you're trying to control things that you have no ability to control, you are going to be frustrated, irritated, annoyed, all of those things that lead you
Right.
to not be positive, focused on the right things, etc. Right? So there's skills, there's ways that we can develop those skills and train those skills.
And what would be the kind of things that you could do for that kind of training? I haven't even heard of that kind of training. So
Right.
what? Yeah.
So you've got things in the marketplace like executive coaching, leadership development, management consulting, and those types of things. They all have
Mhm.
their place. A lot of those are not steeped and grounded in psychological research, right?
Oh, okay.
Or those professionals may not be psychologically trained, right?
Right.
So the idea is that what we do is the biggest employer of what we do is the US military. So having performance psychology professionals working with special forces,
Hmm.
aviation pilots, soldiers that are boots on ground, they're in some of the most high stress, high duress environments and still expected to perform their best, right?
So we do more performance psychology in the military than we do in sports.
The sports world is improving and coming
Yeah.
along, but the US military has been using it for decades, right?
Wow. I didn't
So
realize that. The first time I'd ever heard about it, it was sports. So,
right. So the Olympics, gymnasts especially, have been using sports
mm,
psychologists to work with them to train their minds to perform under extreme pressure. Every professional team now, hockey, baseball, football, soccer, they all have performance psychology professionals helping them train their mindsets. Also, the big four consulting firms all have performance psychology professionals on
mm,
staff to train their high performing consultants how to perform under extreme pressure, right?
interesting.
So there's a lot of environments that are using this, I'll say, technology to help professionals perform their best. And so we're
Mhm.
just bringing those into this space to help folks do that. So it's an aspect of, okay, help me understand what's getting in the way of performing. Is it your communication? Is that a detriment? Is it the fact that you're not understanding how to lead effectively or maybe manage effectively? What's getting in the way? And then we'd look at that, understand what you're doing, what you've tried, what's not working, and then provide you some evidence based skill development around those things.
Interesting. Um, so when it comes to burnout, then, I mean, we've been talking about it being a personal issue, but what do you know about it also being a team issue or part of a failure of just simply the way your organization is designed?
Right. So the idea here, as I mentioned, is the myth being it's an individual issue. It's on you as the employee. Research has shown, and this research has been conducted in various workplaces outside of cybersecurity. So in the late 70s, the research started in emergency rooms with nurses and doctors.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Super high stress, high pressure
Makes
environments,
sense. Yep.
a lot of burnout there. So it's grown from that to a variety of different workplace environments. But the research shows that the organization and the way it's designed is really the bigger culprit in adding stress burden onto employees.
Okay. What does that look like?
So there's
What?
6 main areas, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned one, workload being one of
Mm,
those areas, right? So workload being one, that's an idea of like, do you feel like you have enough resources to manage the workload that you're expected to do, right?
right on.
There's a variety of reasons why you may not feel like you have the resources, either in terms of technology or staff or whatever it is. There's also stuff like I was working with a cybersecurity leader for a large organization. The first meeting that we had, he said, Steve, I need to explain to you that my brain works differently than a lot of people's,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So it takes me a long time to really process what somebody says to me, especially if it's an emotional thing, right?
Hmm.
That they're expressing to me.
Yeah.
So for example, my boss may come to me and say, hey, I've got another project. He'll explain the project, the reasons why he wants me to do it, and the deadline or the time frame, whatever. It may take me 2 days to really process and then have a response back to him on if I can take that project on, if it's too much for me, whatever. And these things, like, because my brain takes so long to process information, it also has a negative impact on my relationships.
Yeah.
So the idea then, as we talked through that first session, he's 55. And I said, have you ever been diagnosed or like assessed for neurodivergence?
Hmm.
It's like, no, what's that? And I was like, oh my gosh, I may have just like solved a major issue for you, because there's been such a thing of like neurodivergence, ADHD, OCD, all these different things, dyslexia. The way that our brains work, it's not the same for everybody.
Right.
And if you are neurodivergent, for quite a while, it's been seen as a negative and a hindrance. The reality is there's a skill set as a neurodivergent individual that actually could be applied in really beneficial ways. That's why like professionals in the SOC incident response that are looking for alerts and different data, they have the ability to correlate and like tie data get together mentally in a way that people's brains that don't work like that don't have the ability to do.
Absolutely. It can be a superpower in cybersecurity.
Totally. So there's an aspect of understanding how your people, one, work mentally, but understanding their personalities and their
Mm.
personality strengths, right? And so understanding how do you build a high performing team is one thing, right? So as
Right.
leaders, we need to understand what motivates our people, because part of burnout is an impact on motivation, right?
Hmm.
Motivation, we look at self-determination theories, our framework for motivation, which focuses on developing internal or intrinsic motivation through developing competency, so being good at your craft,
Yep.
autonomy or decision making and control. How much control do you have as an individual contributor on a team, right?
Right.
A lot of people don't provide that autonomy. So if you're not allowing your people the ability to determine when they're working, how they're working, contribute to certain projects, whatever it is, you're diminishing their motivation
So it sounds like micromanaging can be a stressor.
completely, right? And then the last thing then in that motivation is relatedness or belonging.
Mm.
That's a core human psychological need to feel like you belong in the environment that you're in.
Right.
And if you're not structuring your work environment to create that belonging, it's going to lead to poor retention, poor effort and productivity, and a variety of things that companies don't want to have, right?
Yes.
So then how do you structure those things becomes an aspect of those 6 areas of workload. Your community, do you feel like the people that you work and have to interact with, there's a level of respect and trust amongst everybody? Or is there political games and that level of trust is not there? Fairness to the rules, policies, procedures get applied evenly and fairly to everybody in the organization. Do you understand? Rewards is one of the most overlooked and, in my opinion, very simple things to implement. Rewards, financial is a bit of it and a part of it, but
Yep.
it's not the biggest thing. People want to feel acknowledged and valued for the contributions that they provide to the workplace. And when you're not, and that's a big overlooked thing for cybersecurity, being the former football player, I refer to IT as kind of the offensive lineman of the football team. They don't get a lot of praise when things go well, but they get yelled at when things go bad.
Sure.
And if that's the IT org, cybersecurity professionals are the referees on the field. They're making calls that nobody agrees with. They're slowing the game down, and people just generally do not enjoy and see them as like the team of no, right?
Right.
So that's changing, but it's still a lot of organizations still operate that way. So the rewards are just acknowledging somebody, like how many people on this call have gotten a thank you for saving our asses,
Right.
right? That doesn't happen very much. So the final thing, and I may have missed one, but the idea is also your values.
Okay.
Every company lists out the values that they operate under, supposedly,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's on the company office walls, in the annual report, on the website, whatever it is. But the challenge is, from an individual standpoint, do you know the primary values that drive your words, thoughts, and your actions? Do you know who you are and what you stand for? Because the idea is we all operate on values, right?
Right.
From deciding what time to get up, deciding if you're going to exercise in the morning, what clothes you're going to wear, all these different things are based on your values. And a lot of us haven't done the work as adults to really understand, are we operating, like, what are the 5 primary values that guide our words, thoughts, and our actions?
Right.
Because we may believe we know what those are, but if we have a value of being honest and then we choose to be dishonest in a situation, we're going against our primary values, which
Or
leads to
that's not truly a value for you, right?
right,
Yeah.
right. That then your own personal values, how do those align with your team? How do those align with your organization as a whole? And if
Okay.
those are out of whack, any one of those 6 things can be out of whack and lead toward burnout.
Interesting. So I don't think most people would even know what their values are if they hadn't taken the time to sit down and ask themselves that question. But I am glad that you brought up the thing about belonging. I recently wrote a presentation that's all about third spaces and how they've been diminishing. I mean, I didn't come up with this idea, but I've been doing research on it, diminishing in our society and the detrimental effect just that has on folks. But I digress. Um, let's give folks some takeaways here. So as far as like a, a daily or weekly practice, what have you found can be very effective in managing stress in a way that it doesn't just become a thing you have to do?
Totally. So I'll start with saying is it's different for everybody,
Sure.
right? So first part is understanding, like, how do you actually respond to stress?
Right.
There's a physical, a mental, and emotional response to it, right? So some people may be aware that they start to get sweaty palms or they get tense in their body areas. I hold my stress in my neck and my shoulder, right?
Yeah.
So once I start to feel that, that's an alert for me of like, oh, something's going on that I need to take a look at, pay attention to, and do something about, right?
Right.
It may be your mind runs endlessly and you start to focus on a lot of negative things that could happen or have happened in the past.
Mm.
That thinking takes you away from being present.
So those internal voices.
Yep. And a lot of that self-talk could be really negative because each one of us is our own worst critic, right? So I'm not good enough. I suck. Oh, I just made a mistake. Somebody saw that, is going to see me as not good enough or not smart enough, whatever it is, right? There's a variety of ways that we talk to ourselves. Some people aren't aware of that.
Yeah.
And then emotionally, you may just feel a lot of fear, anger, shame, sadness, whatever it is, and maybe you connect with that more. So developing awareness is the first thing.
Awareness. Okay.
And then secondly, if this is a practice, which for many in cybersecurity, it's not been a practice of like self-care to an extent,
Yeah.
understanding what works for you, right? So that takes some testing and experimenting with, right? So you may, like, I may work with somebody and find that they're telling me they notice their heart beats real fast at first. That's a signal for them. Well, there's ways that you can actually impact the survival instinct response and change it and reverse it, right? So you start to slow down and calm back down and ground yourself and interrupt that survival instinct response. So that could be breath work. It could be moving your body. It could be holding ice in your hands, right? Like something to interrupt that process because maybe you feel heat in your hands, right? So there's
Now,
a variety of ways.
breathwork is one of those things I think most people can do without having to go grab something. So what would an example of breathwork be?
So a lot of people talk about box breathing,
Yep.
right? Box breathing is one that
Put
the
your head
Navy
in a
SEALs
box,
have used
right?
quite a bit, right? So if you think about a square box,
Yeah.
the whole idea is each side is either a breath, an inhale, or an exhale, or a hold, right?
Okay.
So that first level is that first side of the box would be inhaling through your nose, expanding and putting breath into your belly and your lungs, right? And it would be to a count of 4 or 5 seconds, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, that type of thing. So you'd inhale to 5 seconds, let's say. And then the other side of that box, you would pause and hold your breath. So what that does, it's interrupting your signal from your heart to your brain because that survival instinct, your heart starts beating faster, your diaphragm moves up towards your heart, your rib cage constricts to
Yeah.
squeeze your heart to pump blood into your arms and your legs to either fight, run
Ah.
away, or hide, right? So that's still operating, but most of us don't have a tiger outside of the front door here that's going to kill us. So the idea is we're really focused on other people's opinions, expectations, and judgments. And so when you feel a certain response going, if it's your heart beating fast, one way to interrupt that is through that box breathing. So again, inhaling through the nose to the count of 5, holding that breath to the count of 5, exhaling out through the nose slowly to the count of 5, and then holding breath again for 5 seconds. You may do that one time and experience some calming sensations. You may have to do it 3 to 5 times, but there is an impact to that.
So you find it can work as quickly as just one cycle?
Depends on who you are and how stressed you are.
But that's great. I mean, for folks that it does work that quickly, it sounds like a great technique.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's a variety of things that we can get into from a breathwork standpoint. I would say the biggest thing as a manager, as a leader in your organization, is to model recovery. So you can talk about it all day long, but if your team is seeing you not doing it, why would they be like, oh, well, I should do it then if he's not doing it at all, or she? There's an aspect then it's like, you've got to show that it's a priority and important, right? So we have several leaders that we've interviewed that say, I make it mandatory for my team to take time off every quarter and make sure that they're not logging on and taking phone calls or emailing when they're taking time off. Right? There's a challenge there, but helping model that is a big aspect of making sure that people are doing it.
I was going to say, do those leaders actually follow their own advice? Because it's hard to take that time off if your own boss isn't taking time off.
Right. And for a lot of CISOs, the response on when they vacation, they're going somewhere that doesn't have cell service.
Wise choice.
Right. So they're forcing themselves to disconnect, which is a great practice to do.
Excellent. And anything else on practices that you want to discuss before we move on?
I'll go back to the leaders of the organization, the managers as well. One, doing check-ins. So if you've got a weekly team meeting, starting it off, just having a check-in where everybody's checking in either with their stress levels, something that's bothering them. So often with clients, we'll do a check-in called Roses and Thorns. It's a way for people to express something that's going on with them that's positive and something that's bothering them.
Interesting.
Right? Roses are people that things people typically enjoy, and thorns are things that people don't enjoy.
Okay.
Right? So being able to check in with that is a quick way to understand, share, for example, a rose for me was I got up this morning and I exercised. So I got up and was able to do something that felt good, even though it took some work.
Sure.
And then a thorn could be, I just saw something about tax season that just automatically throws a thorn in my side because nobody enjoys doing their taxes for the most part. I don't specifically. So the thought of doing taxes was a thorn. But that's a simple check-in, right?
Yeah.
Modeling the check-in and then also prioritizing control, fairness, and recognition.
Oh, okay.
So how can you, there's a CISO in Salt Lake City named Jason Elrod. He talks about being a power broker, right?
Okay.
This idea that you as the leader are not supposed to control and retain all the power in the organization. You hire people that do the job and are smart and can think for themselves. So you need to empower them to be generating resourcefulness, innovation, creativity, but also allowing them to make decisions, right? That's how you start to model and train people to be leaders in the organization and develop their careers, right? So prioritizing control for others, not for yourself. Fairness being, how do you administer policies, procedures, all these things in a way that is fair to everybody on the team, but also for people that are doing the work, that they're getting rewarded and promoted.
Right.
Right. So also acknowledging that in the team of hey, this person did a great job on this thing. I want to acknowledge them because it's important what they did. Right. And then finally, actually, those are the 3 things I just went through.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Now I think this modeling is even harder in our webinar, not webinar, but Zoom, Teams, WebEx type environment that a lot of remote workers are dealing with. Is there anything that leaders can do to even just model a little bit of that when we're on virtual presence?
Yeah, I think first and foremost is starting with the question, how can I incorporate these? Right. So being willing to try
Hmm.
and also being willing to fail, right? Just because you all acknowledge how important control for your team members are, fairness for your team, and you're recognizing your team's contributions,
Yeah,
that's the first start, right? Leaders in cybersecurity, there are so many intelligent and highly competent leaders in the industry. There's an aspect of like, those are skill sets.
yeah,
So, how do you use your intelligence, your resourcefulness, all these things to help create just little aspects of these things, right?
right,
Because we're not looking for big shifts, we're looking for 1% change,
sure,
right? That then on a day to day, when you start stacking these things daily and weekly, they start to compound and create bigger change, right?
yeah,
Pretty soon, you're going to start to notice your team operating differently and more positively than a lot of the other teams in your organization. And everybody else is going to be like, what are they doing? Like, there's something going on there in that team. Like, they're more positive, they're more productive, they're more engaged. I don't get it, right?
yeah,
So I think it's just asking that question first. And if you need some more help, there are resources like myself and Green Shoe Consulting that can help provide um, more mind share, more strategy, more implementation behind these things and helping
sure.
to refine.
I love the idea that it's in much of cyber right now, we're talking about continuous various things, right? Continuous attack surface monitoring, continuous threat monitoring, stuff like that. Continuous but incremental changes in behavior and modeling fits that theme. So we can just apply our geeky brains to this behavior as well. We only have a few minutes left here. I know, and we alluded to it earlier, that you've been doing some actual hard research in this space. Now I know the research isn't done, but can I get you to share at least some early findings that you've run into as you've been doing this research?
Yeah, there's a lot that is coming out of this, and so just to give some background. So
Yeah.
there is no evidence-based scientific research on stress and burnout and cybersecurity as it stands right now, or that we're aware of. So that's starting to change. There's more awareness that there's high distress and burnout in the industry.
Hmm.
So what we decided to implement this past year was we really wanted to start the understanding of what's causing the high levels of distress and burnout in the industry. So we partner with some academic researchers, and they put together some interview questions and an assessment. And then we're working to interview 40 CISOs across the United States. We've got 35 done to this point. We're wrapping up the next 5 in the next few weeks. And
Fantastic.
these are CISOs at Fortune 500, Fortune 100, some Fortune 20 that have been a part of the biggest public breaches over the past 7 to 8 years,
Wow.
right? So we've gotten great participation and engagement. And what we're finding out of this is a lot of interesting things, one of which is we're seeing a trend of CISO personality profiles.
Mm.
So we're still trying to figure out how we want to share this, but we're looking at right now the tactical, operational, and strategic CISO personas. Tactical CISOs are very much hands-on, and part of the trend in the industry is you start hands-on keyboard, you get really competent at those technical skills, then you get promoted because of that. And then the idea is they want you to be a manager and teach 5 others how to be like you.
Right. With no training on how to be that kind of person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So a bit of a skills gap in that, which creates more stress. But the idea is you continue then to get rewarded and promoted, and then soon you find yourself in a CISO role. And we're seeing a lot of the CISOs we've interviewed, more than 50%, said that they had no really dreams of being a CISO when they started out in the industry.
Really?
And so a lot of happenstance of like, well, you should get promoted, and they work their way up. So that's an interesting one. But that tactical CISO is still wanting to be hands-on keyboard because that's where their competency and their skill sets lie. And there's challenges over wanting to be that power broker of trusting your team. And maybe you don't have enough team and resources to manage the job. Therefore, that's why you're hands-on, whatever it is. But there's an aspect of taking failures, incidents personally, and the fear of being fired, or the fear of being the former CISO of Uber, or Tim Brown, all these folks that went through really hellacious breaches.
Sure.
And had a lot of challenges in terms of managing that whole process, right? Not only managing it in terms of the job, but mentally, emotionally, physically, et cetera.
Right.
So that aspect is a challenge, but then you move into an operational, so that the stress levels are very high for the tactical persona.
Yeah.
The operational CISO starts to get away from that hands-on piece, but will dip back into that if need be.
Yeah.
So there's still some trust issues. They're getting a little bit better at not taking things personally. They still do.
I know a few of those.
Managing or enforcing boundaries around work and personal life is still a challenge.
I think
they're still on call, have a hard time switching their brains off from work and being present in the moment with their personal lives. Stress levels are still fairly high, not as high as the tactical, but then the ideal state that we're seeing is being that strategic CISO, the advisor CISO. The advisor CISO understands what they have control over and what they don't. They understand that there's a lot that they don't have control over. So they're not taking things personally. They understand the separation between themselves and the job. Their identity is not tied or fixed to their CISO position and title.
Yep.
Because of that, and they're advising the business and putting the onus on the business to say, here's the risk. Either you want to minimize this risk and you will give me money and funding and resources to do so, or you won't. That's your choice, right? So because of that, they're able to set up boundaries more effectively. They don't take things personally, and their stress levels are much lower. So the idea behind this is that we can provide an assessment that allows you to understand what persona do you typically fall into, and then provide you some skills and some training to move from tactical to operational to advisor.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, and with that, I would love to see people helped through those stages and grow them. And you know, I'd like to give a special thanks to NetSPI for hosting this. I work at NetSPI in their advisory services group, and in my opinion, advisory services includes things like this. So if we have clients out there who could use some sort of advisory services around this, please let me know. We can probably make something like an engagement with Steve happen for you as well. Like I said, I'm also trying to set up workshops with Steve. Right now, we're working in the Chicago area, but I need to know if there are people in other areas that think we could get together a workshop with multiple peers in other cities. So again, let me know. You can contact me through LinkedIn. With that, Steve, this has been fantastic. Great insight. Let's keep the ball rolling. I know there's a lot of people out there that could need help. So if you saw this and it was helpful to you, pass it along to someone else. Pass Steve and I's contact information on as well. And we will reach out and see if we can help you.
And thank you very much, NetSPI. Thank you, Robert. Greatly appreciate the opportunity to share this messaging and try to help as many people as we can. So thank you.
Thanks.